The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. It's great to be with you on the start of another work week here in Edmond, Oklahoma, our headquarters campus. We're coming to you today at the last day of camp. Well, this is actually departure day. The last official day was yesterday. We had, quite a few activities all through the day. There was a last-minute dance and some competitions in the morning. They did a few benchmark exercises to compare with how they looked or how they felt coming into camp, some of the benchmarks compared to the first day of camp. And what else? We had a cornhole tournament. We had a frisbee golf tournament. And then in the afternoon, we had the much-anticipated track meet, some excitement out on the track meet, circling the soccer field. So we had a big cookout together with that. And then finally the awards show last evening. And 6 great speakers, 6 campers giving speeches that came out from the speech class. So that's been a tradition for youth camp for many years now. And that was followed by the awards presentations and some videos and some comments and fellowship, all kinds of things that extended right into the deepest part of night. So we're here a little bit tired this morning, but also excited for the young people. As I drove over to the studio, I saw a few of them packing up and making their way, soon to be anyway, back home. So probably some tired and somewhat sad campers as we see this exciting experience, this educational program come to an end. And so many things this year that we learned, so many things that we tried that were new. Quite a few things really worked well. A few things we're continuing to tweak and to modify. So we've had some good discussions already in thinking about SEP for 2021. But across the board, I think it was just a very successful camp, an educational camp. As I was mentioning to everyone last night, over the course of 19 days, the young people enjoyed, I hope they enjoyed anyway, 16 forums every morning. We had from 9:30 to 10:15, 45 minutes. We got them into the Bible. We got them into history. We tried to set their minds on the right track to begin with. And, of course, even before that, they had breakfast and then the ignition workout, the 15-minute workout to get them ready physically for the day. So we had that as sort of the regular features in the daily activities. And together with that, of course, a lot of physical and strenuous activity as well. So there was a good balance. It was very busy all the way through, but as I say, a pretty good balance between the spiritual and the physical. Hopefully all of the campers can go home today and get some rest this evening, tomorrow, and then get on with preparing for next year, preparing for the next camp. Just one email here, feedback to Friday's program. It says, "Good morning, I'm new to this show, and I love what this man is saying. Everything is so true." So we do continue to get some new listeners. I spoke to a few listeners to the program yesterday. One gentleman who's been listening for a couple of years now very excitedly came up and said he was an avid listener to the program. So it's always exciting, though, too, to see some new people coming along. Like that individual, new to the program, and he likes what's being said. Another listener, by the way, told me yesterday that he had the radio show on. He works in construction, and he went into the office, or he goes into the office early to get things set up for the day, and it's an early start for the radio program here in America, at least in the central part of the state, or the country, I mean. 7 a.m. So he listens to the Trumpet Daily as he's sort of prepping for work. And one of his coworkers came in one morning, and this listener reached over to turn the volume down. And his coworker said, "No, leave that up. Who is that? And what is this program?" So he wanted to hear it. And according to this listener, he's been listening. His coworker's been listening to the show now every day since that encounter. So again, another example of someone that's new to the show and is listening regularly. Well, think about this headline from Noah Millman at The Week. It says, America is coming apart. Europe is coming together. It's important for us at times to, particularly in this crazy year, this bizarre year, this prophetically significant year, 2020, to just step back and see the bigger picture. Here we see the United States of America unraveling before our eyes, and Europe is coming together. What gets lost in all of the craziness with coronavirus and lockdown and the rioting and such is the fact that in this calendar year, well, this is when Brexit finally happened as well. And as this article brings out, with the UK moving out, all of these crises around the world, Europe is quietly coming together. Europe is quietly strengthening its unity. This article says this week's exemplar for banding together is the European Union, whose leaders agreed to extraordinary new measures to promote a broad economic recovery in the wake of the coronavirus. It says the agreement represents an about-face from the stance the EU took in the wake of the financial crisis of the last decade, which emphasized austerity rather than stimulus. More importantly, it broke two key structural taboos. The European Commission will, for the first time, be authorized to borrow significant sums of money, and a large portion of that sum will be disbursed to member governments in the form of grants. So they're seeing what the United States is doing, all of this printing of cash, this stimulus money. And here is Europe finally coming along with that thinking. Not that that's the way to go by any means. But this represents a significant change in this economic union. It says those structural changes set a precedent that could be a foundation for a much stabler European governmental edifice. A key problem with the setup of the EU has been that it is a monetary union with no comparably unified fiscal policy. As a consequence, in times of recession, member states are constrained, much as individual American states are, by their inability to print money or to run up unlimited debt. But they had no equivalent to the federal government to turn to for fiscal assistance. Now it says they do. Now they have that. Now they have sort of a federal equivalent, similar to the United States. It says, and notice this in particular, the question is, how did things change so much so quickly? How are these changes happening so fast? That's something we need to keep asking in 2020. The world is changing. It's not going back to the way that it was. We've been making that point repeatedly. It says the simple answer is that France and Germany were in broad agreement on what needed to be done, and that when two giants of the EU agree, it is difficult to build a blocking coalition. In other words, once Germany decides this is the way we're going, then that's the way the EU goes. Germany, by the way, Richard sent me this article, this Gallup poll that asked whether people approved or disapproved of the country's global leadership, and Germany rated the highest. 44% approve of Germany. The world loves Germany. And of course, the United States is down on the list, I think in second place at 33%. We had an article 7 years ago in the Trumpet. We're all falling in love with Germany. Brad McDonald wrote that piece. What is it about this love for Germany? And speaking of forgetting our own history, what about the history with Germany? Here we see all over the United States these violent agitators pulling down statues, vandalizing government buildings, destroying cities. It's been going on in Portland for 2 months now. We'll get to that in the next segment. We're all falling in love with Germany. So much history is being erased or forgotten. History will repeat itself, as we've said so often. Returning to this article at The Week, America is coming apart. Europe is coming together. Listen to this. It says, one might also say that even the most reluctant member states understood that this is a time when, if they did not hang together, they would surely hang separately. So with all these crises worldwide, European states are saying, we better come together. We've got to hang together, or we're going to hang separately. It says, but in fact, they did not all hang together. One key member, the UK, had formally walked out only in January, just as the viral storm was breaking. Seems like such a long time ago that we were talking about Brexit. That happened just in January, just a few months ago. The UK walked out. And listen to this, because of course you heard this on this radio program and at the trumpet.com website about how that the UK's departure, it was not irrelevant and may even have been dispositive. It says the UK was a large and strong European member state, particularly disposed to guard its own sovereignty and hence to resist efforts toward ever deeper union. It says, had it been in the room, the historic deal would have been much less likely to happen. So it's exactly as we said it would be. Once Britain is out, then that removes all the resistance, or at least much of the resistance, to bringing that core together, that strong union. It's a mixture of iron and clay, as Daniel 2 brings out. But for a short time, it's going to come together and show real strength. How could this happen so quickly? This author asks. It says, if you want a political union to succeed, its major components need to agree on the essential nature and purpose of that union. Papering over fundamental differences may work in normal times, but in a crisis, they can tear the union apart. See, in a crisis, we have to trust each other. We have to come together. That's the way they're thinking in Europe. He says, which brings me to the union that seems to be coming apart, our own. The primary characteristic of the American response to the coronavirus has been its disjointedness. So here we go. He's a lefty, far to the left. And so the remainder of his article goes on to talk about how that all the problems in the United States of America trace back to, of course, Donald Trump. But he is right about the union unraveling in the U.S. It's coming apart in the United States, in large part because of these violent agitators. He says nothing about that in his article. He talks about the coronavirus, the masks. Some have masks, some don't, etc., etc. Like that's the big issue that's causing all of this division in the United States. Well, it is causing division. There are some states that say, no, we're opening. Others that say, no, we're locking down. So many things, of course, being politicized. Much of the failure at the center of national power can be laid at the feet of President Trump. He despises the president. He's not alone. He's one of many in the world of media, the Democrat media complex. The mayor of D.C., by the way, we had this story last week, didn't get over to it. But there's cities, there's states now. I saw an interview with the governor of Ohio, Governor DeWine. He's a fairly liberal Republican, but he's gone back and forth with respect to mask wearing. Now it's mandatory. It was mandatory in Washington, D.C. There was a headline last week, President Trump was maskless in the lobby of his D.C. hotel. The city plans to investigate. We've got to look into this. Did the president wear a mask? This is the kind of thing our governments are spending a lot of time on, and meanwhile they handcuff the police, and homicides are skyrocketing, and Portland's going up in flames. And now they're going after people who aren't wearing a mask. Unless you're rioting, then everything's fine. They're going after churches. What about the Supreme Court ruling that said, hey, Nevada, if you want to clamp down on churches, fine, but of course you can open up the casinos. You can make the doors to the casinos wide open. You can bring in thousands. But then tell the churches, yeah, only 50 people for you. And then the Supreme Court backs that? And that's what's happening. An upside-down world. So go after the president to see if he was wearing a mask or not. And, of course, you only have to go back a few months to hear the experts themselves say that not only is wearing a mask not helpful, it could make matters worse. You might have seen the story about Dr. Fauci throwing out the first pitch for the Washington Nationals baseball team last week. He has the mask on and so on, and then there's the picture of him later in the stands. He's sitting next to two friends, one on each side, and of course the mask is pulled down, and he's just smiling away. Oh, he's having a good old time. This is the expert that's out front now on the mask crusade. Picture is worth 1,000 words. They don't even take it seriously themselves. Another one captured Governor Cuomo at a social gathering, not wearing a mask. See, they're out there on TV telling you to put on the mask, and then they don't wear them themselves. But listen to the experts. These are clips from March and I think some from February. That's just a few months ago. Listen to what they were saying about masks back then. This is clip 2.
Just you and me wearing these masks, what Dr. Fauci and what Dr. Schuchat have said is that could actually sometimes be more harmful to you than not wearing a mask, because if it's not fitted right, you're going to fumble with it, you're going to be touching your face, which is the number one way you're going to get disease is unclean hands touching your face.
Well, it's important for folks to know that face masks are not recommended for the general public. There are two things people should know. Number one, if you wear a face mask and you're not wearing it properly, you're going to be more likely to touch your face, and you can actually increase your risk of getting a respiratory disease like coronavirus or flu.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is.
For the average member of the public wandering down the street, this is really not a good idea. What tends to happen is people will have one mask. You can imagine they don't wear it all the time. They'll take it off when they get home. They'll put it down on a surface that they haven't cleaned, or they'll be out and they haven't washed their hands. They'll go and have a cup of coffee somewhere. They half hook it off. They'll wipe something over it, they'll put it back off, and in fact you can actually trap the virus in the mask and then start breathing in. So
they could be putting themselves more at risk by wearing a mask than not?
It just doesn't, so yes, because of this issue of, if you like, behavioural issues, which are really important when we're talking about infectious diseases, people can in fact adversely put themselves at more risk than less.
More risk than less, they were saying, February and March. Even... What did the doctor say, the distinguished doctor? Even in the middle of an outbreak, you might feel better about yourself, but it doesn't do any good. You heard from Dr. Fauci. You heard from the Surgeon General. I'm not sure who the British expert is there. But there they were, February and March. Not only is it not helpful, it could be harmful. I mean, the one I have, I keep in the glove compartment in case I have to use it. It's just sitting there in the glove compartment. Who knows what else is in the glove compartment? And then you got to strap it on. And then like they said in February and March, if you fiddle with it, if you put your fingers up to try to fix it or to pull it down while you're eating, it made sense back then. Today, I mean, that's what you just heard there. That's heresy. You put on the mask. Everyone's putting on the mask. Washington, D.C.'s putting on the mask. The state of Ohio's putting on the mask. That's the world we're in, upside down. This piece at The Week, as I say, this is a radical leftist. But listen to what he says after he trashes the president. He says toward the end, one piece of advice you'll often hear in couples therapy is to take the possibility of a breakup seriously, not as a threat, but as an option. People who feel trapped don't make the best negotiators, but once the possibility of an exit is real, rather than a desired fantasy, its costs and possible benefits can be more rationally weighed against other options, including renegotiating the terms of the relationship. So he's saying, America, it may be time to start talking about a divorce. Why should we stay in the union when we've got a crazy man in the White House? This isn't the first time you've heard this. More and more commentators are talking about it. They're discussing it. And can you imagine the tone and just how far-reaching this will go if President Trump is reelected? 4 more years of the scary man in the White House? He says, in that spirit, perhaps it behooves all of us who are appalled by the Trump years and by what has happened to the party he purports to lead to devote at least some of our energy to thinking outside the box. How much do we actually want our states and cities to depend on the federal government versus how much freedom do we want to chart our own course? So, hey, let's go it alone. Let's break away. Let's start talking about the divorce. And what does this headline say? Here's America coming apart. And it's right at the time that Europe is coming together. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. If you'd like to email the program, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Is there a more urgent expression in the Bible than the last hour? When he wrote his epistles, the Apostle John thought it was the last hour before Christ's second coming. In fact, it was only a type of our time today. Every detail of what John prophesied is now being fulfilled. Request the last hour. Never before has proper time management been more important, and this book will give you the urgency you need to organize your life God's way. Request the last hour. As part of this free offer, request The 7 Laws of Success by Herbert W. Armstrong, one of his most popular books ever. If you want to be a successful life organizer, then you need to read The 7 Laws of Success by Herbert W. Armstrong. Again, both books are completely free, so contact us now and get the help you need to organize your life God's way. The Trumpet Daily.
We spent quite a bit of time at the summer educational program talking about the war on our own history. And this war, of course, has coincided with the war against America's founding institutions. You see the center of the epicenter of the violence, the crime, the destruction in Portland. It revolves around that federal courthouse. They're trying to burn it down. They're trying to tear down the barriers. They're lighting fireworks off and exploding them around law enforcement. They're pointing these dangerous lasers at law enforcement. 3 of them, as I said last week, have been struck blind because of it. It's been going on for 2 months. And you have people like Brian Stelter on CNN and others that are telling you it's not really happening. It's not really that serious. Or if there is some violence, it's only because President Trump is sending in help, sending in reinforcements. Listen to this report from a Fox News affiliate in Oregon. And this is a reporter who's talking to a couple of individuals on the street about what's happening in the city of Portland. Here's clip 3.
Michael Rogers, who also lives in the area, says the city isn't doing enough to stop the violence.
When one area of government can't take control of the situation, the next level steps in. And yes, I do believe that lots of more people need to step in on whatever end it needs to be. If it's state, if they won't do it, then the federal government needs to step in, yes.
Both men tell me it's surreal seeing the destruction left behind.
It's depressing to see what's going on in our city. I mean, I've lived here like 14 years, and I just feel like I'm walking at a funeral.
Rogers says it's so bad he doesn't even want to live here anymore.
I used to love Portland. I used to call Portland my home for years. I used to always know I'd come back to Portland, and for the first time in my life, I want to be somewhere else.
Protesters I spoke with say they'll be out here until their demands are met.
And those demands, as we covered last week, it's basically destroy the police, destroy ICE, as one of the walls said with the graffiti. Or we're just going to burn down the city piece by piece. So they're doing it piece by piece. And you heard two residents there. One's a lefty, one's more to the right. Both of them see their city going up in flames. And the one resident in Portland, of course, used to be a beautiful city. Sam noted how that there's so much history there with God's work. This is where the 6th era of God's church started. Herbert Armstrong making that trek every day to the Portland Library. And you know about some of that history there in the Willamette Valley. You think Satan is inspired by that history? You think he cherishes that history? He hates that history. He loves seeing Portland destroyed. And you know, Los Angeles is not much better. The Los Angeles area, the basin there, of course, the work after it grew, it outgrew the Willamette Valley. Mr. Armstrong moved it down to Pasadena, California. What a blessing when you see God's work today. The little oasis that we have here in North Edmond, Oklahoma. The same is true in Edstone. You can have cities going up in flames 70, 80, 90 miles away and feel like you're in a safe bubble, like here on God's campus. Now, eventually that's going to change. It's going to be violent and there's going to be destruction everywhere. And God's going to have to protect his people in a safe place. But you look at some of the history that goes back to the 1930s, that goes back to the 1940s, and Satan is angry. There's a section, by the way, in the New Throne of David book about the tours that my father went on in the Portland area. We of course, secured the prayer rock from the Fisher farm, the prayer rock that Mr. Armstrong used when he'd be outside getting his exercise, and then there was this prayer rock about 1.5 feet high that it was just perfect for the kneeling position, and he'd go outside in the privacy of those hills in the Willamette Valley, Oregon, and he'd get in his daily prayers. The New Throne of David talks about that history that revolved in many ways, it revolved around Portland. And look at what's happening today. I wonder what it looks like around the Portland Library. I don't know how close that is to that federal courthouse. Maybe some of our listeners can report back to us on that. But there's a lot of history there. 2 months, 60 days or so, These rioters have been taking to the streets and just doing whatever they want. Listen to Representative Gerald Nadler. He was asked by someone on the street, well, what about the violence, like in Portland? Will you disavow the violence of Antifa? And this is how he responded. This is clip 1.
It is true. There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa? That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
It gets crazy, said the individual. Antifa, the Antifa violence in Portland, says this U.S. House of Representatives official. He says it's a myth. A myth, and I don't know why he says it's a myth in Washington, D.C., but it's the major media that's out there saying there's nothing going on there. There's nothing to worry about there. And the local residents are saying they want to move out. They want to leave. They can't believe what's happening to their city. All of this, as I say, it coincides with the war on our own history. Deleting the history. Satan wants to delete it, whether it's our spiritual history, our national history, whatever it is. If there's history with God there, he wants to erase it. Last week we had 3 segments on George Washington and John Adams, and then Thomas Jefferson on Friday's program. Listen to this clip from Campus Reform. They're basically at the University of Florida asking students at college, students at the university, if they think that the founding fathers are heroes or villains. And listen to what the students in America had to say. This is clip 5.
They were kind of the foundation of this country, I guess, and getting everything started. But most of them were racist, so they owned slaves and stuff like that. So
I would say yes and no. I think it's new times now, so we now have to make up new things. So I would say villains, yeah.
I mean, they accomplished a lot of things, but a lot of them were not very good.
Villains? They own slaves?
I would say more on the villain side, just because they were the founding fathers and they pretty much created the foundation for America, which is one of the biggest reasons we have all of these problems today and why they have not gone away.
I think, that you shouldn't idolize them and you shouldn't view them really as heroes and be able to learn from their mistakes.
Shouldn't idolize those founders. They're responsible for all the problems in the United States of America today. They're racist. They're villains. And this, in so many ways, you feel sorry for those young people because this is what they're hearing. This is what they're hearing from their professors, their distinguished professors. They're certainly not getting forums like what we had at the summer educational program over the past 19 days. Villains, not heroes. If you think about the impact that Thomas Jefferson had on the United States of America, and who can deny the fabulous wealth, growth, expansion, freedom that, well, one of those students even acknowledged that at the end. I didn't play the rest of the clip, but he at least did acknowledge that, well, we do, at least we do have some freedoms. We're mostly a free society. Well, many of those liberties are being taken away by this radical Marxist movement that wants to control everything from the top, that wants to expand the size and the power of government. We've taken these freedoms for granted, and now we see them evaporating away. Thomas Jefferson was a man of vision, as I said on Friday's program, when he saw the opportunity to expand the United States, to double the United States in size. He jumped at it. And overnight, Back in 1803, the United States of America doubled in size, and all these states right here through the Midwest, part of what used to be the Louisiana Territory. What a miracle. What a miracle. Right in the midst of the fifth resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon and his army just devouring Europe. And yet it couldn't put a dent in Little England, and it couldn't get a foothold on North America. And in fulfillment, miraculous fulfillment of prophecy, these two brothers, Ephraim and Manasseh, just exploded onto the scene following the demise of Napoleon's empire. How much of that goes right back to the one founder that most of these radicals hate the most, Thomas Jefferson? Well, as I played for you on Friday, not that long ago, just a few years ago, Barack Obama even said that Thomas Jefferson represents what's best in America. Some have called him America's philosopher of freedom. The biographer, Dumas Malone, he said that the spirit of liberty was the essence of his mind, Thomas Jefferson's mind. A love of liberty. I've given you this quote before from Jefferson, who said, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be." What you saw in that campus reform video, a lot of ignorance. You think that kind of ignorance is going to preserve America's liberties? If you expect to be ignorant and free, you better wake up. You better look around and see what's happened to other nations that have gone down this road toward socialism, Marxism. Jefferson was, as I said Friday, was practically obsessed with education. This was a man who understood how important it was for all of the population to be educated the right way, to not grow up in a state of ignorance. He said that education was rooted in the belief, his belief, in the vast improvability, if not perfectibility, of mankind. That's what Dumas Malone wrote about Jefferson and how important he felt like education was. This next quote here, it says, "If the condition of man is to be progressively ameliorated, as we fondly hope and believe, education is to be the chief instrument in effecting it." That's a quote from Jefferson. If we're going to improve our nation, it will be because of education. It's very similar to statements Mr. Armstrong made back in the 1960s about how that we are what we educate ourselves to be. It goes back to the educational system. Like I said, these young people, they're coming out of institutions like the University of Florida, where they're hearing this over and over and over. And so they get out in front of the camera and they say what you heard them say there. He's racist, he's a villain, he's not good, he created the foundation for all these problems. Thomas Jefferson, of all people. Look at what this man accomplished in his life. As I covered on Friday, look at what he accomplished for the nation. This is like America's Leonardo da Vinci. Among his many accomplishments, his biographer writes, Jefferson was a statesman, a parliamentarian, a codifier of laws, antiquarian, historian, surveyor, philosopher, diplomat, scientist, architect, inventor, educator, lawyer, farmer, breeder, manufacturer, scientist, botanist, horticulturalist, anthropologist, archaeologist, meteorologist, paleontologist, lexicologist, I don't even know what half of these are, linguist, ethnologist, biblicist, mathematician, astronomer, geographer, librarian, bibliophile, bibliographer, classicist, scholar, and historian of religions, cryptographer, translator, writer, editor, musician, and gastronome and connoisseur of wine. That's from the quotable Jefferson. What a remarkable life. His pursuit of knowledge. He didn't know and understand God's purpose and plan for mankind. But this was a man who was educated. He was beyond educated by today's standards. He was a genius. He was a genius. He is a hero, should be. He should be represented as a hero in the American classrooms. But sadly, we're at a time when all of these individuals of history are being deleted. Dumas Malone says he followed an appallingly rigorous program most of the time. These were individuals, as I told the campers, that just drove themselves. They were motivated. They were ambitious. Dumas Malone says next to tyranny, he hated indolence. He hated it. He hated inactivity. He was a hard worker. He made sacrifices for the country. He risked his life going to Philadelphia in the heat of the summer with the spread of all these diseases. He wasn't wearing a mask, by the way. He hated indolence. One of his classmates says that he could tear himself away from his dearest friends to fly to his studies. He really did pour his heart into his studies. Is there something we can learn from this example? Is there something our young people can learn from his example? There certainly is. No matter what color our skin might be. What an example. It says here, I was a hard student until I learned, or rather entered on the business of life, the duties of which leave no idle time to those disposed to fulfill them. And now, retired and at age 76, I am again a hard student. That's a quote from Jefferson, commenting on his lifelong pursuit of education, knowledge. He gave this advice at one point: determine never to be idle. No person will have occasion to complain of the want of time who never loses any. Determine never to be idle. And then finally, I love this one. I gave it to the campers 2 or 3 times at camp. It's wonderful how much may be done if we are always doing. It's wonderful to think about how much can be accomplished if we're always out there doing, if we're always out there producing, if we're always moving forward, if we're action-oriented. It's wonderful how much can be done. I prodded the campers yesterday, and well, even before yesterday, on this very point. Now you can go home and really put some of the principles and lessons from camp into practice. Put them into practice. Put them into your individual day-to-day living. How important is this history? How important is it for us to take, as God does, a positive view of history? Not that he glosses over the problems or the weaknesses, but these are remarkable individuals that every American can and should learn so much from. I played this clip a couple of years ago from David McCullough. It goes back to 2005, and what he said about something that happened when he was a young boy. He visited this famous monument, this historical monument, and it changed his life. This is clip 4.
We have to take them to those historic sites ourselves. Don't wait for the school trip. Senator Kennedy has been taking his nieces and nephews and many of his family to historic places year after year. It's a wonderful family tradition. It ought to be a family tradition everywhere, because those trips can change your life. I was taken to Monticello by a school pal and his mother and father on spring vacation when I was about 14. And I know it changed my life. It's what started me down the trail in my interest in history.
taken to Monticello as a 14-year-old, and it changed his life, obviously for the better. Now David McCullough is an old man today. He's in his 80s, I believe. So you go back to his visit to Monticello, I guess it would have been in the 1940s perhaps, 1950s. How different would that visit be today? I've told you about the visit we had a year and a half ago. How disappointing it was. It was awesome to see Jefferson's inventiveness, all that he did with his study and the architecture, the layout, the design, the estate, everything. What a vision. And then you listen to the tour guides, and how depressing. If that was last year, before all of the craziness of 2020, what are the tour guides going to be saying today? How much longer is Monticello going to be open? How much longer before that burns down? The war against history, the war against America's founding institutions. We're here to revive that history, to keep it alive. Someone was asking me, one of our campers, in fact, over the weekend, if we were going to write more about the history of the Philadelphia Church of God. I guess the closest thing that we have to that is Raising the Ruins. That, of course, focuses on the transition from Mr. Armstrong to the Koch administration, and then, of course, the lawsuit, the battle over Mystery of the Ages. So there's lots of history in that book for sure. But we certainly have to fight to preserve our history. And you're not going to fight for something that you don't love. We have to love our history. We have to appreciate that past. We have to hold on to it. We have to cherish it. It's a wonderful family tradition, said this historian, David McCullough, to visit these historic monuments. He did it as a 14-year-old, and it changed his life forever. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. If you'd like to send some feedback to the program, you can write us at td@kpcg.fm. We thank you for joining us on today's show, and we'll see you tomorrow.